Morning.
Good morning.
So Peter is talking to the early church, and he's written this letter to help them to understand who it is they're supposed to be. Because we sometimes forget that in the very beginning, all of this was brand new. And they're trying to figure out, are we Jewish and yet we're now Christians, and how does this work, and what is expected of us? And they're having problems. They're having all sorts of issues. And Peter and Paul and John, along with the gospel, will also write letters. All of these letters are to help them to understand who it is they have been called to be. And they're not really mature. Peter and Paul both make reference to the fact that they're still kind of drinking milk. That they're still at that infant, very much so, even in time-wise, they're in that infant stage trying to grasp what it means to be God's people. And not surprisingly, they don't have it down yet. They aren't perfect. They are making mistakes. And as we know, as history will unfold, we as the church will become perfect. We won't make mistakes and we'll get everything right. Which is why Peter's letter to them is so relevant for us. Because over 2,000 years later, we're still struggling with what does it mean to be God's people? How do we manage this? And how do we share this incredible gift and responsibility with the world that at times is indifferent to us and sometimes hostile? God has called us to be God's people, and we get a big dose of mercy with that. And that is something that we have to hold on to. Part of the problem with the church is that we have strived for, and then again in Paul's letter, we are a royal priesthood. We are the special people that God has anointed. And I think, unfortunately, we often misinterpret that. We get the idea that we are royalty, because that's what Peter says, royal priesthood. And so we're royal and we're a priesthood. And so we somehow think we are more important, that we are special in a way that lifts us above others. And even when we're struggling to be able to be this royal priesthood and we're making mistakes, sometimes the thing that people kind of fall back on is, well, okay, if the saying, if fake it till you make it. So if we're not being the perfect church, then let's at least pretend to be royal and priestly. And we carry about this air in the past where we are lifted up. And we think somehow that we share God's message with the people by being these perfect examples of what it means to follow Christ. That we finally, after 2,000 years, do have it all down, and we present to the world this image of a royal priesthood, a holy people who have all the answers and no longer struggle. And every time we do that, we lie to ourselves, we lie to the world, and we do an incredible disservice to what it means to be a part of the church. Because along with being God's holy people, being God's people, we are a people with mercy. And it's I love that line in with Peter. Once you were not a people, but now you are God's people. Once you had not received mercy, but now you have received mercy. And more than royal or priesthood, that is the image we really need to hold on to. Because it is only with mercy that we keep trying to do this. If there was some sort of final exam and we had to list all the things that we did right as God's holy people, it would not look good. But we receive mercy because it's not in our perfection. It's not in our ability to set a perfect example. It's in our ability to receive the mercy of God that makes us God's holy people. Not our perfection, not our righteousness, but are accepting the fact that we are loved by God, that God gave his only Son for us before we were good. And now that we aren't always really good, still we receive this gift. And Peter's trying to help them to understand it is mercy that defines us. And if mercy defines who we are as God's people, then it needs to be mercy that we show to this world. Not this sense of deep expectation that you will get this right and this is who you have to be, but that even as you stumble and as you fall, God loves you and walks with you and will continue to walk with you. That gift of mercy is so profound. It is grace that sets us apart. And I have said this before, and I say it because I know that I need God's grace. And when I really open myself up to receiving that grace, I then realize how important it is to extend grace. Not because I'm trying to earn what God has given me, but because I am celebrating the gift I have been given and trying to help others to see what it is to receive that grace. This past weekend, we were in southern Ontario, the homeland of Mennonites for Eastern Canada, and it was the conference was conference, but what really stood out for me for most of the trip was how much driving we had to do. And a lot of that was on the 401, and twice, Sunday and Monday, we drove right to downtown Toronto. Monday we had to drive through Montreal, and we drove to the Niagara Falls, and everywhere we drove, the drivers around us were, trying to think of a good word here, a challenge. Now, I admit that in the past, I have not always been the most patient driver, and I have often tried to get from A to B as quickly as possible. And sometimes that has meant that I have not necessarily been the most gracious of drivers, and I apologize for that. At least I do after. But driving in southern Ontario this past weekend, it scarred me. I've done it year after year, but they seemed particularly rude. Maybe it's because Kaylin and Ian were watching me, but it was a sense of people just kind of like, someone pulled up on the shoulder on the 401 and passed, like they got maybe 3 seconds ahead of us after passing all these people and forcing their way in into the fast lane. People were, but I realized at a certain point, and one guy who cut people off and then tried to get in, I did not let him in. And then I thought, well, Gord, why are you doing that? Why are you doing what they are doing? And then when I'm driving in downtown Toronto and I'm nervous, and then people let me in, and it's a simple act, and I receive the mercy and the grace that they have given. And I am reminded how important it is that I then live that as well. But this is just driving. How is it in our lives that we who have received so much mercy and grace, so much forgiveness and compassion, don't find ways to share it with other people? If judgment is to be given freely, then I can be judged on so many things. And yet I have received the mercy of God. So how dare I then stand in judgment of others without extending mercy that I have received myself? And even more so the church. God's royal priesthood. Royal, not because we're perfect, but because we are marked by grace. That is our royal mark, and that should be the sign that the world knows us for. Not that we are holier than thou or that we lord it over others, but that we are free dispensers of grace. And yet, In my experience, I have known churches that have rejected people because they have felt that the people would not reflect well on their image. That if these people who had committed crimes were to come back and be with them, then the world would judge them for having criminals with them. And so have basically kind of moved these people on. And this has not happened once, twice, three, or four. This has happened many times. And I am sad for the person, but sad for the image of the church. Because it is in our ability to extend grace to one another that we are able to show the world what this means to be the royal priesthood, to be God's people, to be a people that have mercy. In the gospel passage, we are told, Jesus says, do not let your hearts be troubled. Don't worry. Oh, man, I wish I could get that down. But I was thinking about that and the whole idea of God's people and being an example to the world. And I realized that most of my worries come from looking forward to things that have not yet happened. I worry about all the possibilities that there are. Or my heart is troubled because I look back and I see all of my mistakes, all of my failings, and I decide to carry them along in a backpack that weighs way too much for me to make any sort of movement forward. And I was thinking of this passage and God being with us, that Jesus telling his disciples, the Father is with you because you have seen me. And I realize that if we are a people of mercy, then we don't have to worry. Because our past mistakes, our past failures, it's not that we don't have to bear the consequences, but we don't have to carry them like a backpack that weighs us down and brings us to our knees. And when we see the future, we know who we are. We are a people who receive mercy. We might not be perfect. We might make mistakes in the future, but never will we outdistance the mercy, the love, and the grace of God. So wherever I am going, God will be there. And I will strive and sometimes fail, but then strive again to be an example of God's mercy and grace. So why am I worrying? More out of habit than anything, I think. Come what may, I will be God's people, in the midst of God's people. Not because I'm going to be perfect, because I am a person that has mercy that has been freely given, as have you. You are a royal priesthood. You are God's people, and you have been called to be an example to this world, not by being perfect, not by not making any mistakes, but by receiving the love and the grace even in the midst of our mistakes, especially with our mistakes. In fact, I think it is one of the profound best signs of the church is our ability to care for one another in our humanness, in our brokenness, in our failings. Because this is the message we're giving to the church, the world, that they are loved as they are, not when they get to a certain level of perfection, will then God's mercy and grace kick in. It's for us now. But if we don't share it with one another, if we stand in constant judgment, how will the world ever come to understand or receive the mercy and grace? Catherine loved her brother Luke. Her brother Luke was one of the most important people in her lives. And she was the older sister, and she always watched out for Luke, and they had always gotten along incredibly well. And even when she had moved out of home, and they would send text messages all the time, share memes, joke around constantly, always be in relationship. But lately, she's been worried because Luke has not been the same. It started when he was living still with their parents, and he started to act out. And in fact, he became angry, and he was yelling at his parents, and it got to such a point where he moved out from his parents and everyone was happy. But this hurt Catherine because this was not the Luke that she knew. And yet Luke continued to struggle, and Luke and his girlfriend, they went out one time together, and he was abrupt and rude, and shortly thereafter he heard that his girlfriend had left him. And suddenly Luke was becoming more and more isolated. And when she'd send him the funny text that they would do, he often wouldn't respond at all, or just one-word answers. And she was thinking, how do I help Luke? What do I say to Luke? But her parents had tried. They had to sit down with Luke and said, look, Luke, the way you're acting, the way you're behaving, this is not good. You have to change. And Luke blew up, yelled at them, and that's when he moved out. And she had found out from his girlfriend that it had happened the same way with her, where she had said to him, Luke, you need to change. And then Luke said, I don't have to change for anyone, and that's when they broke up. But her parents were telling her, you need to talk to Luke. Luke respects you. Luke trusts you. But what was she supposed to do? She knew her younger brother as well as she knew anyone. And she knew that if she sat him down and said to him, you need to change, he was just going to blow up at her as well and cut her out. He at least still responded somewhat to her, unlike other people. And so she didn't know what to do. And she was getting pressure from her parents to intervene, but she knew if she intervened, he would probably run away and the last connection with Luke would be lost. But she couldn't just stand by and watch. And then one night she had a dream. Luke was drowning in a river, and she was calling upon God to save him and everyone to come and to help and to help. And she saw Luke go down and Luke drowned, and she woke up and she realized that she'd been in a boat the whole time but had never moved it towards him. And she thought, okay, God's telling me I have to do something. But what? So she went to visit her uncle. She had an uncle that lived out in the woods. Everyone kind of considered him half mad, half crazy. But he was one of these uncles that just seemed to know things. And so she went to him and she explained the whole situation to him. And then he looked at me and said, who are you? And she thought, oh, he's lost his mind. And she goes, I'm Catherine, your niece. And he gave her that eye roll that says, don't be an idiot. I know who you are, but who are you? And in regards to Luke, who are you? Well, I'm his brother. She said, okay. But what does that, thank you, I'm his sister. And he said, but what does that mean? She thought about it. And he said to her, when you know the answer to that, you'll know how to talk to Luke. And it seemed vague, and she was kind of annoyed, but she realized that in that rested the kernel of truth. And so she called Luke, and she begged him to meet him for a coffee. He hadn't met with her for the last 3 times she tried, but she begged and she said, please just meet with me. So they met at a little cafe, and Luke, and she could tell he was sitting, his back was tense, his face was set, he was ready to bolt. He looked both angry and terrified at the same time. And she slipped into the booth. He goes, look, she goes, I just have one thing to say to you. And he kind of bunched his shoulders and like, what? She just said to him, I love you. I love you more than I can say. You are my brother. And no matter what you do or where you go, my love will not change. I want you to know that I love you. That's all. Whatever we do, wherever you go from here, you will not go without my love. And he's kind of confused. So you're not telling me I need to be different or anything? She goes, I'm just telling you that I love you. I am worried about you, but I worry about you because I love you. And suddenly his whole face just fell. And he started to cry. And he says, I have made some terrible mistakes and I don't know how to get out of it. He says, and I thought maybe if I just pushed everyone away, then no one would care when I go down because I am going down. I am lost, he said, and I could not talk to anyone about it. For the next 2 hours and 3 pots of coffee, they sat in that little cafe and they just talked. And when they got left, it's not that his problems were all solved, but Luke knew that moving forward, he had his sister with him no matter what was coming. And she knew that this was not going to be an easy road. But she knew who she was. She was the person that loved Luke, and so would be with him through thick and thin. This is how the world should see us as a church. As a place that loves them. As a place that will be with them through thick and thin. That extends that love and grace. We are a royal priesthood. And as a royal priesthood, it means we are the people who are standing, pulling people into God through our love, through our grace, through the mercy. That's who we are. We're not perfect. We're not going to get everything right. The only real thing we have going for us is that we have received the love and the grace of God. And the only real task we have is to share that with God's other children. Because we are family. We are brothers and sisters here, but all those other people made in God's image, they're our brothers and sisters as well. And especially those who are going through hard and difficult times. The main message we need to give them is that we love them. And in this way, we truly show them what it means to be God's people.